Sì, buongiorno a tutti da Stefano Carrara di Tourette Italia. Oggi abbiamo l'onore e il piacere di avere Shane Fistell con noi dal Canada per una importante, interessantissima intervista che ci ha concesso. E da adesso in avanti tutto si svolgerà in inglese, naturalmente. So, Shane, it's a real honor and pleasure to have you here. So, first of all, on behalf of Tourette Italia Association, I would like to thank you very much for being with us, and let me also thank our associate Monica Gentile for allowing this contact. So grazie Monica for permitting all this. What to say? I'm very thrilled about having this opportunity to interviewing you right today, and I know that you were in contact with Monica for a time and currently. So what we know about you, what I know about you is that you are an artist and also a martial artist, and that you had to struggle with Tourette during your life. So can you tell us something about you?
Well, I also write, and so about I think it was 6 years ago, a piece I submitted a piece to the New York Times. I was invited. They ran a series on disability and um, my life with Tourette, I believe it's called, and it got a lot of attention. Um, there was the series editor is he's Italian. Can't think of his name. It'll come to
Oh,
me.
really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The New York Times. It's easy to find. It's online. It's available online. Um, My Life with Tourette's, and they title it, and it's a type of an essay. And many people with disabilities submitted these essays. And at that time, I wasn't even using a computer. Wasn't online with Facebook and
Yeah.
minimally, minimal. And and my sister said, "Oh, you missed the wave. You would have had a lot of attention." But a man wrote to me, a young man. He said, "I know what it's like to be isolated and lonely. So I was in a motorcycle accident, and now I'm a quadriplegic. And all my friends faded away. They dropped off, and hardly anybody comes to see me now that I'm here." And he's just has his friends are very. It shrank. It narrowed to a few, and you can no longer physically take part in life in active way. And
So why
um,
do you think your friends faded away in that occasion, and how does
well,
it?
I had friends, over the years, but early on in my teens, you asked me early on when I was in the kitchen, um, and I transferred, I moved, shifted to the living room, about teen years and the obstacles I faced. Is that not correct? So
Yeah, yeah.
um, first, and you asked me about the awareness, and is there uh, what a Tourette Foundation here, so on, and updates and activities and so on. There is minimal advocacy. It's spotty. There is a Tourette Foundation, um, and I had Oliver Saxo himself had a falling out with them, and um, but you know I haven't taken part in any meetings in years
Yeah.
or conferences, and some of them are very far.
So
Pardon
when
me.
do you?
So the obstacles I encountered when I was a kid,
Mhm.
when a teen. First, I was diagnosed about 17 and still a juvenile. And as I said, I was referred to the Clark Institute of Psychiatry, which is generally has a neurology wing, psychiatric wing, and so on. Even speech pathology and and so on and so on. So they put me in a ward. They wouldn't put me in a ward with um, uh, neurology, in the neurology ward, and they wouldn't put me in the uh, psychiatry. So they put me somewhere in the middle. I was sandwiched in the middle, and I was at the back of the ward, the
Yeah.
only boy on the ward, and it was all women and girls. It was not paradise, believe me. It was like a prisoner of war camp. All these girls and women were starving to death, and they were anorexics. They suffered from anorexia nervosa, and I wrote about it. And I said early on, uh, in our initial, you know, uh, chat today or encounter, that I shared it with Oliver. He wanted to see it, and he was stunned by it. He said it's extraordinary, and so that was my. But when I was at the juvenile treatment center, they gave me Ritalin, experimented with Ritalin, which is a speed derivative. So that was like putting, rocket fuel in me, and a type of rocket fuel.
So Shane,
And
Shane, sorry to
so
interrupt
that
you, but
I had academic problems. I had academic problems, and I missed a lot of school, and I had social problems, and encountered a lot of people who were physically violent with me, and I couldn't. It was difficult to ride a bus, to board a bus.
But what do you
Um,
think that happened? Sorry, why do you think they were violent? They were mean to you because they didn't understand what you had by that time, because Tourette is not well known, and or for a different reason. Because this is very interesting, because it deals with one of the main problems that Tourette persons, especially when they are teenage, they have. So the fact that they are not understood by persons. So the stigma and the inappropriate knowledge a person has. So what do you think happened, and what do you suggest us as associations in the world we should do to cope with this and to solve this problem?
well, one is that I've noticed uh, uh, something that stands out, something that's uh, more pronounced, an issue, significant one, is that there are very few PSAs, public service announcements. And years ago, a man, he's a famous actor, William Shatner, Star Trek. You may have heard of him.
Yes.
Yeah. So he was the Tourette Association, Tourette Cinema Association, TSA of the United States. He was the honorary president for many years,
I
from
didn't know
about
that.
Oh, you know that. And he
No,
did
no.
a series of, he did some PSAs that you can find on YouTube. And I wrote to him and thanked him some years ago, maybe 12 or 15, 14 years ago. And he sent me a link of with his daughter. He was talking with his daughter. He invited me around Christmas to take part, and they were just having a conversation. So I had the honor of that, and being invited. But yeah, they're precious few. Um, those sources, I believe a written source or written material is important, and it's not supplementary. It's important, but a PSA, for example, I understand. I was talking with Monica Gentili, and about recently I found there's a famous Italian actor who played a mafia boss, a mafioso. They get respect, even if they have
They do.
Tourette. I'm
They
sure.
do.
No, but for the wrong reasons. But the so an actor. I can't think of his name. Oh, he's
Don't
anyway.
worry.
I told her. I beg your pardon. He played in a series in Italy on the mafia. It was a mafia.
Maybe Alessandro Borghi. Maybe
That's it.
Alessandro Borghi.
Alessandro Borghi.
He's a very good
Alessandro
actor
Borghi.
and very known one.
Yeah. So he has Tourette,
Yeah.
and he went public. He was talking about it, and he accepted an award at an award ceremony. we didn't have a lot of ticks there. I saw some. He was suppressing it. He should have let it all out.
So
But
what you're saying that in order to teach people and to spread a correct knowledge about Tourette, famous persons could be one
yeah,
resource.
it's not always conditional uh, that or precondition that a famous person, and they get, oh yeah, because they'll be looking at Alessandro Borgia and say, oh look, it's Alessandro. But like Robin Williams, my late dear friend, wanted to take part in a documentary, um, a BBC commissioned documentary years ago, and that somehow fell apart. He had a difference, a conflict with the producer about sharing it and rights and all that. But he was excited about it. Um, going to Europe with me, and Oliver, certainly Oliver Sacks, Robin Williams, and me, and it almost happened. But yeah, if he were to come out and discuss it and to demonstrate or exhibit his ticks, that would be important because he could give a 1 minute or 2 minute PSA, on
And
especially on
attention,
television. Pardon?
that would give
Yeah,
me
public service announcement or attention notice, and and but today, um, people are afraid of many things, and um, as I've encountered people who accuse me without any sympathy of being on some drug, um, and I get punished for that and excluded, or once they decide that, or just somebody out of control. And even if I don't interfere with them, I don't, engage with them and disturb. Just my presence is enough. But I have to function. I have to buy groceries. I have to use public transportation. I have to um, live, and so I can't hide. And I have done so. I've been, you know, had sometimes earlier. I've heard it years ago. They call it social avoidance. I'm sure
yeah,
you're familiar with that term,
yeah, yeah,
social avoidance. And uh, but um, the problems I encountered, as many teenagers, all teenagers encounter new problems. Um, Socializing, being accepted, um, and so on. This puberty, sexual awakening, and all this, and um, adjusting and that and this and that, and I know that people with Tourette. And I wrote to Monica yesterday, a couple of days ago, that to be accepted, I realize that many people with Tourette are self-deprecating. They insult themselves, and they do the dirty work of other people. We put ourselves down and ridicule ourselves and say, hey, oh well,
yeah.
this is that. It's being apologetic all the time, and this lowers a person in other people's eyes. But it also, this meekness undermines them, and it's very bad for mental health. It's not funny, and it's not. Um, I've seen
Not at all.
comedians. A lot of comedians have ridiculed Tourette and complain about it. Say, "Oh well, at least they're giving attention to Tourette." Why?
No, 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 not at
But
all. They don't know that.
it's
So,
negative, adverse. But
what is the difference in terms of suffering social stigma or this type of behaviors on the public means of transport among being an adult and the child and the boy? So how in other terms how is the how are the challenges of the Tourette condition changing are changing between being a teenager and the adult? Are you facing the same problems in terms of relation with others, or are
yeah,
these problems
well,
changing and how?
the, the transition from childhood to teenhood. I went in my own story, my case. I was early on. I was taken by force by. I have a brother. He's a half brother, whatever brother, and taken by force to a. It was a regional. It was called a Doncaster, Thistletown Doncaster. It was a. In fact, I found out it was type of. Um, it was a hospital, but it was called like a juvenile. It was more like a detention center. Now
Yep.
this is voluntary. I was. I was. It was voluntary in the sense that I was. Uh, supposed to just talk with people. They didn't even recognize my Tourette. They didn't notice anything, and they didn't question or investigate our home life, which is very violent. Terrible
So
sexual
sorry, sorry,
violence, and
sorry, sorry to
mm,
interrupt, but are you
mm,
saying that you were put into this juvenile hospital without
almost. I
having
fled.
a diagnosis of Tourette?
I was not pending a diagnosis. There was no uh, 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 pre-diagnosis. They didn't. There was no attempt made to do this. All they wanted to do was interview me and say, "Oh well, would you like to stay here? And we'll take you here, and it's a nice place to be." And I would have been denied my freedom, and I would have been with other children or boys, separated from my family. We were already separated, which is just the it converged because overlap because my parents broke up when I was they had a terrible violent breakup, and I was about 9 years old. And I have two younger sisters. Um, so they were ages 6 or 5 and 3 or 6, 6 and 3, 5 and 3, and we were separated. I didn't see them for a very long time, but when I went to this place, I used to hide, and my mother would come to collect me, pick me up, and I was when my parents broke up. We lived in a nice neighborhood, and I had to live with this family, the Browns, uh, at the north end of the other or the east end of the street. Um, and when I lived with a boy there, he was so violent, it was incredible and terrorized me in my childhood. Really, he was something seriously wrong. But he should have gone there, for examination. And my brother, but I'm not going to enter into all you
No, no,
know
but I understand.
but I had great difficulty. So I faced, one was the Tourette, and two the violence, and they conflicted, and I was chained to both, and I had no escape. So I fled. I had a big fight with my family and conflict, and I didn't want to go. So finally, I wouldn't return to this place, and they couldn't. There was no court order, because it was not a legal finding, or a legal like there's no certificate. I was just, they were looking into me, but for the wrong reasons. They didn't even look into the trend, which is very strange. So, yeah, those are the obstacles. And then later, I was diagnosed when I left home. I was 15. I left home, and I stayed with my father in a very cramped apartment, small, filled with books, and I slept on the floor um, for about a year. I found a room, a local room, a local room, and stayed there. Then later moved down here, this apartment, when I was about 18, when I was released from hospital. Um, but the problems I faced, say transportation, that was very difficult, tricky, boarding, and even a lot of people, yes, a lot of people, you say mean with me. Well, they were not just mean. They were some people can be quite malevolent, and I recognize that it's a type of these encounters where they see somebody vulnerable and less or weaker than they are, they perceive, and then they decide, okay, that person is a target, and then they'll come after that target, the person.
Yeah,
They feel
unfortunately.
uncomfortable by it, like I'm not an example, a model of perfection in their eyes, but they are. So,
So,
you know,
you said that you are a writer, but on top of that, you are also a martial artist and an
yeah.
artist. So,
Oh, let me show
Before
you. Let me show you.
I could
Hold
see
on. Hold on.
exactly
Let me
some
show you.
beautiful
Let me show you.
painting.
Let me show you. Can you see this?
Yes, I can.
So I received my black belt. So I'm a shodan, which is the first level. I should have been higher by now, but I missed a lot of karate.
And
So can you see it?
how long did it take to get the black belt? How
And
many
this
years?
I'll tell you in a moment. Well, um, so this was granted in Japan. It was authorized in Japan, though I did it in Ontario. I performed a test before 12 um, a 12 member, I think it was 12, was it 10 or 10 member um, judging panel, and I had to perform uh,
But are you teaching? Are
not
you teaching
pardon.
karate? Are you teaching
How many
karate?
years? Well, let's say it was very interrupted. It was my karate. It was like it was you know I started when actually I started when I was a little boy. I was about 6, right near my parents in Toronto. We had a record store and um, instruments and records, and sold musical instruments. And just below it, south, was a karate school, and I started that karate school, and then it broke off and returned in 1983. I studied 5 years there, left, and returned in a sporadic way to in the early 90s. By then, my father had a stroke, and yeah, it was terrible. So I had very interrupted. So I'd say altogether 5, 6, 7, about
A decade,
if
maybe?
yeah, 8 or 10 years. I it would have been sooner had I been consistent. I'd gone more dedicated. But then when I became dedicated, the time was pared down, um, compressed, and I got it quite quickly. With when I was focused. And
And how do you
so
feel
it's great.
when you
It's
apply
great for
karate?
motor control,
Yeah,
and coordination and everything. And I can use my rapidity, my rapid movements, take advantage of it in karate because they're so unexpected and rapid and accurate. you know
and
so
what about art? Do you paint?
I do. I'm a painter and I'm a sculptor, and I was working in printmaking, but I don't have that available. um Yeah, I worked on the theme of starvation and animals, and even starving animals sometimes, but tigers have been a theme, horses, portraits. Here, I'll show you one if you'd like to see it.
Sure.
One is available here. I even have my.
Thank you very much, Shane.
Thank you. Here's one. I don't know whether you can see that.
Yeah, yeah, we can see. We can see the painting.
Yeah, and
I also saw a tiger before. So why do you like animals? What do you like
well,
to paint animal, and
I
why?
recognize in animals they have they have I love the fact that admire tigers in the wild are untamable. A wild tiger. Although, if of course they're raised from cub by when they're cubs, then if they befriend whomever, or if they're rescued or something, they can form great friendships with somebody. Like say for the example, in Born Free, the story Born Free, Joy Adamson. There's a movie 1967 of a woman who rescued an orphaned lion. Um, the family, the um, the lion's pride had been killed by a hunter. But the tigers are. I like that they represent, and there's a false, like they're falsely accused of being posing some danger to in the wild, certainly, but they don't pose any danger to anybody. They themselves are in danger, but tigers have been um, mismeasured or uh, uh, used by humans as a symbol of, you know, anywhere, of aggression and virility.
Yeah.
But they're also, but beyond that, there's more. That's a superficial look. Uh, like they're given a false identity, and Tourette's is given a false identity, and um, you know, I think that, and the fact that they're untamable, and that they're feral, wild, and that they have, which I think is an element of Tourette, not in ferocity or anything dangerous, and
So
but
are you saying that Tourette is giving person affecting by that a false image to others, so that others cannot really see who
yeah, they
really is
can't
the
see the
person
person.
Tourette.
They can't see. For example, I was going to say the man with the quadriplegia, they can't get past that, and they feel uncomfortable. They feel tense, anxiety, even by in his presence. Like I read a book that Oliver Sacks gave me. He gave me a credible book. It's a short autobiography by Jean Dominique Bauby. He was a French. He was I think in Paris. Yeah, the editor of Elle, women's magazine. You may know it, ELLE, and he suffered a stroke and complete paralysis, everything, and he suffered what is called LIS, locked-in syndrome, and
Hmm.
he was in bed. It's the opposite of me, and sometimes I would call mine shut-in syndrome. But
Yeah.
I read it, and I reread it during the pandemic, and if anyone was ever concerned, felt, and I also read and I listened audiobook of the diary of Anna Frank, and being
Yes.
isolated and cut off and in danger, risk, and so on. And the there's there are a lot of parallels, but he wrote this by blinking one eye. That's all he could communicate, almost like ship to ship or ship to shore. The military,
Yeah. 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 Because of the of
and
the of the
they had
locked
they
in
had a light.
syndrome.
They would have a light, and they click it. They uh,
Yeah. That's
like that,
that's that's
and
clear. Uh,
so
Shane, you mentioned for the second time a very important person, which who is Oliver Sacks. So
Oliver
uh,
Sacks, yeah.
we read something about Oliver Sacks, but I know that it was a person who was quite close to you, and with whom you shared a part of your life. So can you tell us about him and about your relation and friendship, I think,
Mm,
with him?
sure. I'll quickly conclude, though, a comment about the tiger is that humans, man, feels feel uncomfortable because it cannot be um, contained or controlled, and that's what they fear most, is that it can't be molded, or dominated, really. And no, um, but my relationship with Oliver Sacks, yeah, it began in just before his birthday too. It was on June 7th, 1980. I think it was 87 or 80, 80 87, 87, and which I'm told Monica said, explained that, oh, that's International Tourette Day.
The
So,
7th of June.
oh.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, that's a coincidence. And you know, it was long before that. But he came here. I we took part in a documentary. We filmed separately, consecutively. He was in northern Alberta with a young photojournalist who has Tourette, and I was in Toronto, and on the CBC Fifth Estate documentary. That it was a worth seeing. It's an award-winning documentary. It was nominated for the best of a decade for Gemini Award, which is a top award, film award here in Canada.
I think I saw it. I think I saw
Yeah,
it.
did you? Eh?
You
And
come out with him walking in a room, and he's smiling, and you go towards the table, and then you speak, and then you come out walking on the snow with some friends as a child. I think it's that documentary. Is that?
that's not the one. That is not. No,
That's
that's
not the
different.
one.
No, this is It was 1987. They visited the crew. CBC visited the Tourette community in northern Alberta. It's a Mennonite. You know the Mennonites. Familiar with them? If you may have heard. The Quakers.
Yes.
Quakers. So the Mennonites are just like the Quakers, very much, and
Hmm.
they because of intermarriage, the gene was expressed, and the majority of people have either Tourette's or tics. The whole community, and that attracted attention around the world. Geneticists and scientists wanted to investigate, and there was a Dr. Kurlan, Kurlan, who led the uh, investigation or the medical team there, and they stayed in or near the community and so Oliver called me a week and a half after. I got a call. Hello, hello. Are you Shane Fistell? I said yes. I'm Oliver Saxo. Um, and so he said I should like to come up to see you, and I have a young friend here who has Tourette. So I said, by all means, it'd be great. Fine, I saw you. I remember. So they drove up in this big old Mercedes Benz and parked here. We went driving, and then walking all throughout Toronto parts, especially near his hotel in central downtown core Toronto. And then I felt that the other fellow with Tourette was jealous, and they just returned from a European tour, and they'd have a lot of conflicts. Anyway, but he said, I want to come back in a couple of weeks to meet you. And then and just we two alone. So he called me, and we although that's when we had a lot of time to talk and spend time with each other. So that's when we formed our friendship, a great friendship. And early on, he said, don't call me doctor, call me Oliver. He wanted to be seen that way. And um, so
And
he,
by that
he
time, he was a
crossed
famous
he
neurologist.
crossed he crossed that the so-called
The barrier.
yeah, the barrier, and the medical, and became I had a fraternal relationship, a friend, with the patient, and then that began to dissolve as a patient thing, relationship, and it was just a friendship. But he certainly did study and made a lot of notes. He made copious notes. You know, I had a
Shane?
lot of yeah. I can tell you one thing that had an
Yes.
effect.
Please
That
go on.
I just comes to mind. We met in Toronto. He came with his editor, his girl Friday, his editor manager, Kate Edgar. She runs the Tourette Syndrome what's it called? The Tourette Foundation. The Tourette Syndrome Foundation in New York. No, the Oliver Sacks. I beg your pardon, confusing her. The Oliver Sacks Foundation in New York, Manhattan, New York. So um, she we met here and in Toronto, and we were at a hotel restaurant, and we were talking and Oliver sometimes he mentioned that we were talking about OCD, and so obsessive compulsive disorder. I was very curious about this, and I said I realized, and he witnessed this powerful, a very heightened sense of smell.
Hmm.
um, uh, unlike most bachelors, you know. So,
Mhm.
but they can't smell their dirty laundry. But you know,
Ah,
I have a this heightened sense of smell, and I said I wondered if my olfactory sense is being heightened by the OCD because it's sending these repeat signals and focusing and I said almost like throwing if you throw a stone into a pond and sends out ever greater rings, growing rings. And he's and I said, what do you think? Shut up! Shut up! And he sat just staring. 30 the whole meal, his meal turned cold. We sat there 30, 35 minutes thinking about this, and he turned to me stunned. I'd never thought of it that way. I've never thought of it that way. It was always considered a nuisance. So he never and he marveled at sometimes I made associations like this, finding one thing, and it just may have, and I strongly suspect it has. Uh, and Oliver was going that way, you know, an evolutionary link. OCD certainly does have. I mean, there's evidence of OCD, um, which is often comorbid, as you call it, you know, a disorder with threat. But Oliver eschewed, he resented, he didn't like to call things deficit. He refused to accept that a deficit, you know, as an economic deficit or a neurologic deficit, because he also said there are also strengths that go in directions, this direction and that direction, and or something, a uniqueness or difference, without romanticizing it. And um, there is also some compensation, something there. But he was shocked by that, and it changed his whole way of thinking about it. You
so,
know,
so
OCD and
Shane,
yeah,
what was the? You said that that Oliver Sacks had a different way of looking at things, and also thanks to this, for example, this last contribution you were mentioning. By that time, how many persons with Tourette had Oliver Sacks been in touch with? So, were
thousands.
you
He had
thousands?
thousands. I once asked him. He'd seen thousands of patients. I don't know what. And then he had his practice. He used his apartment, or he had a nice condo in the village, the West Village in New York.
Yes.
And he had people with Tourette, people with other issues. They would come and into his study and talk with him. You know, he met two people unusual with Tourette. He met a police officer
Wow.
and he met a U.S. rear admiral.
An admiral.
So yeah, an admiral, U.S. Navy, and I bet he's a
Wow.
real sorcerer. I bet he's a real sorcerer. If anyone gave him trouble, he'd say, "Ah, you see that? See those sharks? Go wash your, go wash your socks in them." You know, but you know, um, he said there are two partners, and he said he feared his partner didn't trust him. So he interviewed them separately. Said, "I trust him with my life. I love him. He's great." You know, and they're well known in the community. I don't know where I think they're in Boston, which is of course in the East. And please. And I found out there's another one. I saw it at a film festival. There's one. He's in Oregon, which is in the West Coast near Washington. There's a police officer with Tourette, and the U.S. admiral. I was told a little about him, but he saw Oliver, you know,
Yeah.
and some actors used Dustin Hoffman used consulted with Oliver for the Rain Man, which is a role the story about with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise about a man with autism. His brother he kidnaps him from his institution.
Such
Uh,
such a great movie. And
yeah,
Shane,
yeah.
What do you think was the main legacy or heritage that Oliver Sacks left to you?
Well, he overcame, not quite overcame. He he had many battles, and which became obstacles in themselves. They shouldn't have been, but you know, um, as Albert Einstein said, great minds always encounter, opposition, and he he was accused and this, but he humanized conditions, and
Yes,
he I consider him this, and I called him this once too. There's he loved the story. He loved this when I called it. He reminded me of Professor Challenger, and there's a great story by Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes, sure.
Right, but there's a separate story called the what was it called? The Professor Challenger, um, Lost Paradise, or I don't. Anyway, Professor Challenger. He's an explorer, an adventurer, and they reach an island which is like it's very similar to the King Kong story.
Yes,
The original King Kong, Fay Ray and um what was it called? Sebastian Cabot or something. They go to that island and encounter the natives, and they're worshiping, and the wall, the huge wall, the wood wall, and of course King Kong is a star. I don't know whether they paid him, but there's Oliver, I said, was like a professor challenger um, in this story, um, because he went into unexplored. He was unafraid to go into that territory. Here he went into backwards of institutions where people were completely abandoned. They are completely abandoned. Now a lot of those have been replaced by people who are in their apartments or houses and still abandoned. The irony, and they're separated from their community or even ostracized. And I say this in ironic sense, politely ostracized. They're
yeah,
but early on, I was talking about friends. I had no friends when through my teens, very few, and they dropped off. And then I gained friends, and uh, some drop off. Um, um, the issue is always having to prove myself, and um, what's the word? As if I have to demonstrate my worthiness, and to take part in in society or life, and I felt that, real or perceived, um, and to also like an imposter. There was I remember this great story with an Italian actor. I think Giancarlo Giannini. He's an
Giancarlo
Italian.
Giannini.
Yeah,
Yes,
he's an Italian, and he goes to France, and he wears a blonde wig. He he's trying to pretend he's like you know, and he's not Italian or something, and he's trying to fit in society. Or is it England? I think it was France. And and other people who pretend they try to fit in, like Malcolm X. This I'm sure he's the black writer, author, activist.
yes, yes, I do.
Yeah, so he said that many young men and even women in the early days, in the 40s and 50s, they dye their hair with this powerful bleach acid, and they would burn. They could even get burns. They could blind themselves or burn their skin, and it was called a conch, I believe. And they'd whiten their hair, and they try to look in every way white, and try to
Like
they
pale,
surrender. They give up their identity, and in some ways I try to, which takes us back to the self-deprecation, because self insulting oneself is a way to get social approval, and converting, and so on, and people having to change their identity, um, for their sexual identity or their physical, you know, uh, Jewish people, Jews or Italians, or immigrants
yeah,
and refugees, or
yeah,
immigrants and refugees, always trying to fit in, and to be this and to be that, and say, oh, I love this, cars, and this food and Coca-Cola, But um, people, when they begin to do that, the danger is they want to become invisible. And I pointed out once to Oliver is that, well, the people could see me very well. They notice me, but I'm also invisible at the same time. Because they know and they hope I'm not there. Not all people. I'm not condemning. Certainly not set myself in as an adversarial or conflict situation with all society and people. But but to humor as a way to break through to people and this and that. I've been in what 7 award-winning documentaries I've taken part in. 7, but
7.
it hasn't helped me a great deal, really. It's like
So,
I'm always going to encounter problems,
I mean,
always.
I was, I mean, I'm very happy that we are having this conversation because I was very carefully listening to your last words, and they make a lot of sense to me, and we are trying to work on that as an association, which is not easy, because at the end of the day, what you're saying is that uh, a person, tell me if I'm wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but a person with Tourette syndrome,
I
uh,
won't correct you if you were.
let's say as a different setup, or let's say configuration than other persons. So in that way, the solution is not to ask, a tiger to hide itself, and to behave different than the tiger would
Lose his
behave.
stripes.
Lose his tribe. Exactly. That's what was I was going to say. So the point is, I perfectly agree on that. You don't need to be that pale French person of the the last century, because I think this is not inclusion. This is not the form of acceptance and you know coming together. We mean, so we think that as an association, we have to work so that people know exactly what Tourette and any neurodivergent person is, because that is the best way, I think, to solve maybe a part of the acceptance problem. To first of all, to have people the proper knowledge, so that you don't make tigers, you don't ask tigers to lose their stripes. You know what I mean? What do you think
You
about this?
know, there are two things I wanted to say. I mentioned I was writing uh, to Monica Gentili, to Monica. Um, One is about um, language, right, and the so-called coprolalia, swearing, compulsive. And
Yes.
years ago, I told Oliver, isn't there a double standard? They said, well, where does this come from? Oh my God, I don't know, not me. Of course, children don't have a genetic predis- predisposition. They're not predisposed to swearing. They're not born as it. It's in my gene. That's it. I can't help it. I swear. Because if they're exposed to it, then they pick it up. But there's something even deeper. They pick it up from the parents and other people in the community because it has currency. It's circulating. And so people use. But a friend of mine years ago, she has Tourette, Joanne Cohen. Joanne sent an article online. I'm trying to think of it. Oh yeah, years ago. It was about scientists discovered that uh, in an area of the brain. I'm not sure. Anyway, um, well, the language area of the brain. Um, that the earliest, that is the most primitive, um, because the brain evolved in parts. It grew. Um, it was swearing. Uh, like vituperation. So the earliest before language, a pre-linguistic society was um, even or pre-linguini,
Hmm.
um, but they the before any language evolved, and every culture has its own language. There was this uh, cursing and grunting and directional and sounds, reactive sounds, and so on. Oh, look, a tiger without his stripes. But a cave bear or a person or a tribe, water, this and that, and they had sounds. They had sounds. They vocalized sounds, and they could be automatopoeic, like oh ah oof boof ah. Um, so the earliest sounds believed or language is believed to be swearing. So that is being, I think, in I have some of it, and I know it comes out under stress. And it just as it's just a smattering. It just comes up. It just fires up. Uh, but I've met some people. A lot of they go on, and it shocks people. And but there's a lot of hypocrisy about language and on these issues. The words that shock. Racial epithets and or fuck, shit, this and that. So, but people aren't shocked by the word war. As the late comedian satirist Lenny Bruce pointed out, it's not my swearing on stage. You know who he was? From New York. You may be familiar. Lenny Bruce.
No.
He said, well, he was a comedian in the 1960s, 50s, late 50s, early 60s, mid 60s. He died, I think, in 1966. He'd make sexual comments and things like that in performance, live on stage or on his albums. And but he said the ugliest words for me are war, hatred, racism. Those are the ugly words. You know, uh, those are the ugly words. Not fuck, shit, this, that. It's meaningless to him. And he showed the hypocrisy of language. Really, it
Yeah, because he
was
went
alive.
under the surface. So I
Yeah.
fully agree. Look, Shane, I have a last question. I would like to ask you, and that's related to what we try to do here in Italy as Tourette Italia, and I think that many associations around the world will be interested in knowing your thought and on your suggestion, and so we are acting currently on three main topics in our association, and those are the focus of our action. First topic is culture. So we try to spread a correct culture and information on thread because we think that would help. And secondary, we have a great focus on school. So we try with Monica herself, Fabrizio, and Sabrina to go to schools to provide information in a structured way and also to help wherever in a school a case of threat is identified so that we properly provide good training to professors so that they recognize symptoms and they properly give all the support to children. And third line of action, the one I'm following with Irene, is job. So we would like to do something quite concrete that help person with threat overcome the problems. For example, swearing is one of those problems on a job place, to help employer understand and exploit all the qualities and strength that these people used to have. So these are the main guidelines which we are following as an association. What do you think about these areas of action? And if any, what is your suggestion for us to be more effective and more concrete in our action?
All right. Well, this is an issue of vital importance, and it should take precedence for the early childhood education or early, like the so-called intervention. is important. And I'm, this Dr. Leckman himself, he said he's not uh, exponent, he's not a supporter of using a lot of drugs. Uh, they can interfere with not only academic performance, but just person's life. And I know some people say, well, we don't have the luxury of doing that, and some people are using, cannabinoid, um, uh, a marijuana, a cannabinoid extracts and so on to control symptoms. But what they need sometimes is important to have occasional one-on-one tutoring for a child. Um, maybe, but many other children experience uh, um, a great difficulty, and he may not tell you their experience, but they have terrible bullying. And in Canada and the United States, I've followed, tracked a series of reports and documentaries, short news or pieces on suicide. Very high numbers of suicide among children with disabilities. I found the site, and also just new immigrants. There's a horrible case of a little girl. I think she was 9 years old, from Syria. Uh, pardon me, a Syrian girl. About maybe now 3 years ago, she committed suicide because she endured uh, brutal bullying, verbal bullying, and physical bullying, and so on. And she came out of a war zone, so she
So
took her own
sad.
life. And some children who are gay do this; they commit suicide. Some children, and I read a science report, even last year and this year, that there's a higher degree of suicide among people with Tourette. There's this a scholarly report, and a higher degree of suicide among people with tic disorders. So they're I these words, also black people and some, also even in the white male community too, adults, a lot of terrible things happening in society. But the early intervention for children with Tourette's, specifically with child with Tourette, must be um, a way to accommodate them, say in a classroom setting, that environment, and also to ensure that they're not going to be bullied, and they don't adopt other behaviors, defensive behaviors, and and get, people get aggressive with them, and so there's a reason for that. But you got to be very cautious. I think also encouraging music and involvement activities to redirect, sometimes I use my art and my karate redirect my Tourette and my tics and so on, and
Yes,
and writing, and
that's very
those are
important.
important. But being isolated, or made to feel different. Well, look, you could sit in the back of the class because you have this and that, or it's disruptive, and how can we accommodate you? There should be a way to find uh, so-called middle ground, to support. And if there's no support, then things fall apart. I left school when I was 15, because under law, at 16, I didn't return to school, and not for many
And
years.
and that was for the bully, or that was for
Oh
any
yeah,
other
that
reason?
in part, and in part bullying. Also, even some teachers, you know, uh, it was very bad. I didn't know what, but Oliver Sacks said to me, "And Kate, you must have been done excelled academically, and I said, no, no, I was terrible, and I had to recover, or to, my father found a remedial school for me. He got a grant, and it was a big struggle to get that. So I had one-on-one teaching early when I was about 18 and a half. So lucky. And in Toronto, and I would go in, I had these 5 days per week, and they did something unusual as a test, you know, um, what do you call it? They gave me a series of poems, presented a series of poems, the famous, Alexander Pope and Shelley and Keats and so on. Um, uh, Whatever, so Pope, Shelley, Keats, and so on, and uh, that's right, and Blake. So they asked me to analyze them, and so I, this is it's just like that. Now, I had no previous academic training, and the teacher looked at me. "Oh, huh." So they had a meeting, and they discussed me. And she came back to me and said, "Shane, you're reading and interpreting poetry at an advanced university level." And I had,
Wow.
I couldn't even spell correct a lot of words correct. I couldn't a lot of weaknesses, but I could analyze things without any. I had I had this strength, unknown strength, and I can analytical, and not, I wasn't intimidated by it. I just looked at it as it was, and um, they were puzzled by that. How could this be? You it's,
And
you know
Shane, do you think that this special capacity you had without having previously studied poetry has something to do with Tourette, or was
it
just
may it may
your natural
I know
weird?
that people with Tourette, we could have it enhanced, like rapid thinking, rapid thoughts. Sometimes we can stumble, like they can crowd um, the brain, but if there's an interest shown, yes, and or given, and if there's a genuine interest in teaching, like if you, I've met along the way a few teachers who had a great interest in the craft and a great interest in teaching children, a love for teaching, you know, and there's an amazing movie I noticed at the dentist. I recently, dentist secretary. I went to the a visit. Visited my dentist some time ago, and a secretary, they have staff, and she said, Shane, you should see. There's a movie recent in India called Hikshi, Hikksi, I think it's Hikshi, about a school teacher who has Tourette, and how she was barred. They wouldn't accept her. She had all the qualifications, but they would not accept her into the school to teach in a teaching position. So she fought her way in, and then she got a call because the other one couldn't. She couldn't cope with the students. They were very unruly in an upper class school, college,
Yeah.
or public school, and so she came in, and that was like, oh my God, dropped right in the middle of this chaos, and she over she won them over. She won over the children and overcame the problem and the obstacle, she herself. So, as for interpreting and understanding, I think people vary in maybe intelligences, or at least, you know um, maybe their strengths and weaknesses, but I think, yeah, generally, like Robin Williams, I even said in a documentary. There's a documentary you might consider seeing. It's well, I don't say that in any modesty. It's just false modesty, phony baloney. But
But what I have to say, thank you.
there's a documentary. There's a there's a documentary called "Come Inside My Mind." Come inside my mind. Uh, it's a documentary biography about Robin Williams, and about the 1 hour and 8 minute timestamp, 1 hour, 8 minute. Robin and I can be seen in conversation when we first met. So Oliver Sacks is just sitting in the background, and Robert De Niro gets up and he walks over to, and he's talking. And there was the first day that they met on the set of Awakenings. You may have seen this movie, Awakenings. based
Sure, sure.
on Oliver Sax's book. So
It's called
1999.
risvegli in Italian.
How do you say?
Risvegli.
Risvegli.
Risvegliarsi means to wake up, awaken. Yeah,
Risvegli. So,
exactly.
uh, so, I sure woke them up. Those two, Robin. I'll tell you what. So he honored me. Uh, those two, I mean Robert De Niro and Robin Williams, uh, and Penny Marshall, brilliant director, the late Penny Marshall. Um, she directed Awakenings, and it was going to be directed by Peter Weir, an Australian director who couldn't take on the project. But
Sure.
they wanted to see an example of Tourette because people with Parkinson's had symptoms just like Tourette or Parkinsonian, caused by the viral induced uh, form of Parkinson's. So they were moving rapidly, and then they start to move slowly and slowly, and then they're like that. So
Yeah.
when I
So
met them, Robin came in and he'd stolen this on board an airplane. God help them if they crash. Survivor. Where's my life jacket? My God. There's a little note there from Robin. Sorry, I borrowed the life jacket. But
sure.
he
I see.
found this. It was a flat. It looked like croissant. I call it that. It looked like a liner for a toilet seat. Like a a horseshoe shape, horseshoe, and he draped it on his shoulders, and it had a pipe like a stem, and he blew into the just once, and it expanded, inflated, and it must have some reactive gas, and um, he blew into the valve. He blew into the valve. It's like a tire valve, and it expanded, and he was wearing this, and I said, I said, that's your ego coat. Inflatable, your inflatable ego coat. So Robert De Niro is looking at him, looks at me, and he bursts out laughing. Everybody started laughing, and then all this tension just relaxed because he was tense with me, Robert, and then and Robert and Robin had a bit of and
Uh,
they were all laughing. Everybody's laughing,
yeah, yeah.
and Robin sometimes quoted. But to return to the issue with overcoming obstacles, because with children's academic, they have to be monitored closely because there is a risk for suicide and self harm and bullying. Um, so, but one-on-one tutoring and the best of environments, can't always hope for that. I didn't have the best of environments. I had a very
Yeah, but
unsafe one.
that's a very concrete and practical advice, because
Oh, good.
one-to-one tutoring, I think, should be the best way. So,
Yeah,
Shane, I think
but
that
not. But caution not to separate the child from the
no,
class.
the idea is quite clear. One-to-one is not to separate a boy from the class. It's
Yeah,
just in certain moments and under certain conditions to provide the service.
yeah,
No, that's quite clear. That's
yeah,
we work with psychologists, and that's the very first thing they teach to professor, that they don't have to create an isolate the person with Tourette from the rest of the class. No, not at all. That's not the purpose. The
yeah,
purpose is in certain moments, in to find the balance between the
yeah,
class itself and the boy with Tourette or the girl with Tourette,
yeah,
and then the idea is to work together, and but when necessary, to provide a one-to-one training, which is, I think, what you meant. So
Oh,
thank you very much, Shane. So
you're welcome, and thank you for
really
the
really
information.
great. I think we took more than 15 minutes, but it was so interesting that I didn't dare to stop you or to cut whatever you were saying, because to me it was like a very good experience. So, and I think I learned a lot from you. So Really,
Okay.
thank you very much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
experience and for being us with us. And yeah, so we'll certainly get back in touch with you, and a great hug and great support from Tourette Italy to Shane Fistell. Thank you for being with us. Thank you very much. So and now,
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you.
so